Thank you so much. Okay, the focus today is today's investments for tomorrow's global workforce. And what we're looking at is how companies, amidst all this change, automation, introduction of AI, and so on, how you have to reskill your workforce, and also looking a bit at this idea of financial security and the various complications that come from that. And to do that, we've got Rob Falzon from Prudential Financial, and you can look up his biography, but he's been there, I think it'd be fair to say, for a little bit of time. And we've got Peggy Johnson, who has been at Microsoft for 5 years, but before that was at Qualcomm for 25. And what I've asked them to do at the beginning, or I've asked Rob particularly, was to give an example from what's happened at Prudential that sort of epitomizes this to you, the challenge you face in terms of reskilling a workforce, getting ready for this world.
Yeah, so at first I think it's both a challenge and an opportunity, John. And there's a lot that we're doing, so let me put it into context. We actually have an aspiration objective to double the revenues in our U.S. financial wellness businesses over the course of the next 5 years, okay? Now, to do that, we expect to do it without actually adding in any material way to the headcount that we've got in the business today. So you sort of think about the scale of that. So to do so requires that we capture the opportunity associated with the future of work. It also requires that we capture the market opportunity, so there's a productivity component and a market component. So the example I like to give that I think best sort of represents what we're going through is around application of artificial intelligence to underwriting. So underwriting, everyone thinks of insurance and underwriting sort of a classic activity. So do you own life insurance, John?
I do have life insurance.
You have life insurance, okay. So I'm guessing about when you would have bought that life insurance, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out in the audience who own life insurance as well. If you go through a classic life insurance process, and I went through it, I don't know, Peggy, if you've got, do you have life insurance?
Peggy's too young.
Okay, good. Yeah, John and I are different vintage. So if when you've gone through that, I'm going to guess that your experience went something like this. You contacted a broker, the broker contacted an organization, you filled out reams and reams of forms to do that. You submitted in all those forms. A couple months, month or two later, either you went to a location or someone showed up at your house and you kindly donated some fluids so that we could do some further understanding of what your health was all about. And then within a matter of mere months, you were told you qualified or not. In this particular case, you guys qualified for insurance. Now, people we're dealing with, they have very different expectations as a result of what's happening in the economy and what's happening by virtue of technology. So if you want to buy something online, say it's on Amazon or otherwise, you now have an expectation that is 2 clicks, 2 days, it's at my front door. Now you're buying insurance from us. You're like, why can it not be 2 clicks in 2 days? Why do I have to go through that process? So we're trying to solve for that. Our customer expectations are being set outside of our own industry. So we took artificial intelligence, we applied it to underwriting, and we come up with something now where it's 7 clicks, it's not 2, but 7 clicks, and 2 days, we can tell you whether you're qualified for insurance. So we brought that down. Now to do so, what we've had to do is we've had to shift talent, right? We've had to shift talent away from underwriting. We need far fewer underwriters if we're using artificial intelligence to do this. But what do we need? We need actually data scientists, right? In order for us to do the predictive analytics around the artificial intelligence. So marrying those two things together is sort of both an opportunity for us and a challenge. The reskilling of individuals who were doing a task, looking at whether those individuals then have the capability to do the new tasks we need in the new world.
Can you very quickly on that, can you get an underwriter to be a data scientist? Can you make, or does it mean actually changing the people? Albeit you might end up with the same number of people working for you, but is it different people?
Yeah, my guess is it'll be some combination, John. So actually, Peggy and I were talking before the session even started, and I was mentioning that on this account in particular. We have a lot of actuaries. Actuaries make great data scientists. They're mathematical people. They've been trained in actuarial science. Taking that skill base and putting it into data analytics is actually something that we can fairly readily do. So we think that we have the opportunity to reskill individuals by going through a series of training and apprenticeships. So there's a combination of things that we need to do to get them from old skills into new skills. That won't be the sole solution, but frankly, it needs to be a big piece of the solution because otherwise I don't know that there's enough data scientists out there in the world for us, any of us, to hire.
No, they were very short on data scientists.
What was Peggy, was interesting, have you had the same sort of thing at Microsoft? I mean, it's changed a lot in the 5 years you've been there.
It has changed a lot. I mean, if you roll back 5 years, Satya had just stepped in, Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, had just stepped in as CEO, and the world around Microsoft was changing. I think a lot of people forget we're over 4 decades old, and that's a long time in the tech industry. And so things were changing to us, our business model was changing, the industry was changing, the competition was changing, and we had to change. And I think it all goes back to the way that Satya was able to change the culture of the company. Because when you take a company that's been very successful doing a certain thing for a long time, it's very hard to change that mindset. You can get a very fixed mindset about that recipe. That recipe worked, I'm going to keep doing that recipe. And what Satya was successful in doing, it was actually based on a book he read by the Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck. She wrote a book called Mindset. And it's all about going from being sort of the know-it-all in the room to being the learn-it-all in the room. And she said in the long run, the learn-it-all is going to come out ahead. Because if you can constantly be relearning, and that meant looking around at the industry around us, understanding what the competition was doing, understanding where the business model was going, you had a chance. And I think you could see over the last 5 years, Microsoft has really gone through an evolution. And we've changed as a company.
Has it involved, the same question slightly to Rob, has it involved the same, Microsoft's done very well, but has it involved a different set of people, or has it involved the same set of people being reskilled?
I think it's really more the latter, the same set of people who were reskilled, who were taught sort of to be the learn-it-all in the room and to understand what was going on. And if you remember, back then we were selling, maybe five plus years ago, we're more box software. That's how you bought your Microsoft software. Came in a box, came home, had disks, those sorts of things. The world around us was going to subscription as a service. So our products, Office 365, now they're sold on a monthly basis. Yeah. We have to please that customer every month. That was a different mindset.
I have to update my Word this week.
Oh, please do.
So actually, John, let me jump in on that, because I think when you're asking about same people, new people, one of the challenges we all face, incidentally, 40 years being successful, think about 140 years being successful. Now, I haven't been at the company all of that time, but we had the same challenges as we're going through our own transformation, that the success can sometimes beget your ultimate unseating, right? And so we face those same challenges, which is making people uncomfortable, saying we're not as good as we need to be. But the challenge you face from a talent standpoint is, when I look at what we're facing at Pru, I actually think it's a microcosm of what everyone's facing, and I'm sure you're facing it at Microsoft as well, which is we have this two-dimensional talent challenge in front of us. One is a pure quantum issue. So about 5% of my positions are open today, and I'm adding to that 5 to 10% every year as a result of sort of natural attrition. And the challenge you have is unemployment rate right now, 3.5%, financial services, 2.5%, insurance, 1.5%. So there's not a lot of people out there to hire. Now, second dimension of that gap is skills. So the data scientists, it's not just a matter of hiring bodies, right? You need the bodies with the right skills. And so when you've got a tight labor force and an even tighter labor force when you go to get the types of people with the skills that you need, you have no alternative but to figure out how you as a company are going to get those skills, not to new hires, but to your existing employees. Otherwise, you're going to wind up with a massive shortage of talent.
Which is very quickly, which is cheaper, going out and hiring or reskilling?
Much cheaper. If you think about hiring, first of all, you think about if you don't reskill, there's severance associated with that, right? And then you got to go out and rehire. And there's recruitment costs that are associated with that, as opposed to keeping people and reskilling. Reskilling is a fraction of the cost of finding new people, of severing people and then finding new people. And so we actually have an economic motivation for doing it as well. We will come out much better off. The more successful we are at reskilling, actually the more economic it will be for us in the long run.
Sorry, Peggy, I interrupted.
Oh, no, I was going to say that we're moving into a time where skills and identifying skills are going to be much more important than a job description. And I think we fall into a hole when we just look at a job and you say, okay, the job is whatever it is, forklift operator, right? I need somebody who has forklift operating experience. But you actually don't. You need someone who has good, maybe eye-hand coordination. And so to the extent that we can start to classify the skill sets that each of us have and then marry it up with jobs that need certain skill sets, we're going to do better off, which goes to your point about reskilling. You don't necessarily need to go out and find that one person who has that exact job title. You need to find the person who has the skills that you need. Many times they're in your own workforce, and with some retuning, you can just put people and pivot them into another job.
Give me an example on the okay, you go from box software to cloud software. How does it, what kind of skills do you need in the cloud that you, and are those things courses you can put people through? Are they skills that you can somehow quantify, or are they just a general sense that Fred is good at this and Edna is not so good at that?
It's a little bit of both, understanding what the skills are. There's going to be some talent and some learning there, but it's really about seeing, when people are doing what they love, they tend to do better at it, and identifying that, and each of us understanding what we're all good at. There's certain things that I'm not very good at, and I tend to migrate away from those. If I'm put in a job where I've got to rely on those skills, I need some retraining. So one of the things we've done a lot at Microsoft is build a lot of these retraining tools. We do a lot in the coding space, because whatever job you're moving into, you generally have to have some understanding of coding or what coding can do for you, understanding your data that you have at your company so that you can surface insights from it. So it's about getting the right tools in place so that we can retrain our employees.
We have something we've stood up, we call it the Accelerator Program. And so it's actually distinct and separate from our normal training, which is set up for just this purpose, John. So we do, you think about the concept of strategic planning and apply it to your workforce. So we force every business and every function to think 3 and 4 years forward, okay? Not a decade forward, because then you're trying to boil the ocean. It's sort of like that's actually too far forward. So it's like, just look around the corner. And based on looking around the corner, what are the jobs and what are the skills that are associated with those jobs that we're going to need by function, by area? We then build that into our accelerator, all right? And so the accelerator starts with some very generic training, but gets to very specific training around taking people into the areas that we see we're going to need into the future. So you have to have the training. But the other secondary sort of important piece to that is all the training in the world actually doesn't do it. 70% of your learning occurs on the job. And so you have to marry that with something we call an apprenticeship program. And we were actually chatting about this a little earlier as well. The biggest challenge there is often not the individual, but the manager. Right? Managers are used to hiring someone who fills this box, this job. And now you have to convince them that, no, this person has the skills that are needed there. They've never done that job before, but trust us, they'll be successful at that. And so trying to marry the reskilling to the job opportunity, the apprenticeship, is sort of an important component of success to that model as well.
Peggy, do you have the same?
Well, we've done some of this with the Markle Foundation, and we worked actually with the state of Colorado on this, about doing just that thing, identifying the skills and marrying them with the needs that were in the state. And it's been a real successful program, but it's the start of, thinking about our skills versus our job sets. The other thing that's interesting, we talk a lot about the need for data scientists. But as we move into this world where we're going to be using more and more artificial intelligence, we also need people who really understand sort of the problem that you're trying to solve, right? You can't just have a group of data scientists solving the problems. So some of our AI teams, for instance, at Microsoft, we have chatbots that can be used in customer support. But those chatbots need to be trained by people who have good understandings of sort of psychology. So we have psychologists on the team. We have a comic book writer on the team to know that when you ask a certain question, what might be kind of a funny answer. So it's like we need all of these different skills, not just a set of data scientists. I don't think we would build a very interesting chatbot if it was just a bunch of data scientists.
I was saying earlier when we were talking off that at Bloomberg, this is a very brief example, and I won't try and become a panelist, but when I arrive, we now do 5,000 stories a day. Roughly a third of those are automated in some way, so a computer is helping write it. But the somewhat really matters. And when I first came to Bloomberg, it was a very similar story. Every company who's represented here, when you announce your results, we used to have a team of people who would sit there waiting to spring on it. They're called a speed team. And so they'd sit and look for Microsoft's earnings or what was happening at the Pru. Now what happens is they spend the previous evening with a computer ingeniously called Cyborg, setting up templates, because the computer will then jump on results and scrape it and start to generate a story that we then do things from. And increasingly that is becoming, you then train the computer to get cleverer, to not just look at Microsoft's revenues and profits, but to look at exactly the number of how it's doing on the cloud in China or whatever it is. But it's the same experience. You can do a bit of training, but actually the knowledge which you needed in the first place is actually still really useful.
So my bet, John, is when you're doing that, you probably haven't changed your reporters very much, but your reporters are now you're covering a lot more news than you were doing before, right? Yeah, so it's this concept of it's not humans versus machines, it's humans enabled, humans plus machines, right? So I think, it's interesting. Anytime we talk about technology and application of technology, we always talk about it as sort of the upside associated with it. It's about growth, it's about, better conveniences, it's about better quality of life, it's about growing revenues for companies. And then suddenly when we talk about technology and talent, it's like, it's all bad stuff, right? Why is that? There's this fear that's embedded in it that somehow technology is about cannibalizing talent.
But to be fair, we could all produce, there are endless reports which say X number of white-collar jobs will go because of automation.
Yeah.
And it will be across very much the industries you're both in.
Yeah, but how many jobs are going to get created by that same technology, right? So one of the other things that, the futurists that I see is by 2030, 80% of the jobs that we're going to have in that year don't exist today. So yeah, we'll have wiped out a whole bunch of jobs, but we'll have created a whole bunch of new jobs. So let me give you another example of that. We have, in our marketing area, okay, we now have a 450-person group in something we call the customer office. This is a group of individuals that we've hired and retrained individuals within the organization to go into, where it's all about digital marketing, right? And it's all about the interface we have with our client and the client experience. So we're not doing away with marketing. We're just shifting away from how we traditionally thought about marketing to ways that the marketing works in the new world.
Do you think there's any sense, the other subject here is financial security, and can you understand why, if you were one of the employees, use Microsoft first, you're an employee at Microsoft, you're doing this big shift, you're totally aware the company's doing reasonably well, but you're terrified that you are, for the sake of argument, 40 years old and you've got certain coding skills but not other ones, that you yourself might be pushed out. Is that a sort of factor in it, that people actually now are more worried about their jobs changing so much that they could get pushed to one side?
I think employers have a responsibility here. They can't just say, well, we've got all this new tech. Sorry, all your jobs are going away. We have a responsibility to our employees, to the industries around us, to use technology responsibly. And so we think of that as we're developing new technologies. We want to ensure that as we're unleashing these technologies, we're doing it so in a thoughtful way, in a responsible way, that hopefully lifts all boats. And
so you don't feel just responsible to your own employees, you feel responsible to employees elsewhere as this thing comes in?
Absolutely, because for instance, things like artificial intelligence, we've heard a lot about sort of the advantages and the great things that artificial intelligence will bring when we're able to reason across these big sets of data. But we also have to think about sort of the downside of that. Those sets of data oftentimes are biased. And so just for myself, I'm an engineer. If I said to you, John, you're looking for the best engineers, okay, let me build you an algorithm. I'm going to surface the best engineers for your company, and I'm going to take this data set of engineers that I've accumulated over the last 20 years. Well, that data set will say that, somewhere around 80% or so, maybe higher, of engineers are male. So you could conclude that the best engineers are male. And where would that leave me as a female engineer? And so we have to be very mindful that this is, as you said, it's really humans augmented by these tools and not replaced by these tools. And you get the best result when you have the two of them together. And if you think of it as a tool, and that's what it is, it'll help you reach a better solution without replacement. And you had an interesting example of your actuaries and the percentage when you mix the two together.
Yeah. So we were talking about this algorithm we put together for the underwriting, and so it's 97% accurate when we use the actuaries to help the data analysts put together the algorithm. And I point out The 3%, it's actually not sure whether the underwriters got it right or the algorithm got it right, you know. But it's a great example of where we actually can marry together the actuaries who are used to not just doing the data analytics, but know how to apply the data analytics to the customer base that we have and understanding it. The data scientists, we have the same experience. It's not quite in the customer, you know, the EQ component of a lot of data scientists may not be as high as we need for, you know, some of the things that we need to put into place. So you can complement that EQ to the IQ associated with it, whether it's the data scientist or the technology, in order to come up with a better holistic result. It's funny, when I was actually chatting with my son this weekend at this gathering, and he said, "So where are you going next week, Dad?" I said, "I'm going out to Aspen to do this thing." He said, "What are you going to talk about?" So we got into the discussion. He goes, and he recalled he was at a little early in his career, he was at an investment banking shop that had done some research trying to marry quantitative investing with fundamental investing. And what they were citing was how you know, when you looked at the chess masters that initially, right, the computer back in the early 90s, I guess, the computer first beat Kasparov or whatever his name was, the chess master.
Kasparov,
the chess master at that point in time. But now in freestyle chess, the winners are the individuals who are assisted by computers. They're beating the computers, right? So it's technology with humans that are actually outperforming. And so I think we have the ability to do that. Incidentally, when you talk about this, one other lens, because I know preceding this week has been we've had the health portion of the Aspen conference, and one of the topics there is, as we think about the future of work, there's the skills gap component of it, but there is this sort of financial wellness and wellness gap component of it as well. So as we're thinking about new jobs, there is a responsibility to think about providing, individuals today and in the future, the responsibility that they have for making decisions looks very different than the populations, the generations that preceded us. Things like their retirement, right? We've now almost gone fully off people that are on defined benefit plans to 401k plans. And incidentally, experiment has not worked out particularly well for an entire generation of people.
Well, that's my point slightly, which I didn't make that well, is that you could have, I imagine there are a lot of people who work for Microsoft who are, by any measure, talented, employable people. But you have this degree of change going on inside the company. There is that fear that if you lose your job, it may well be every statistician will tell you, you'll find another job easily, you're highly employable. But the mere fact that suddenly the idea you stand a chance of losing your job during the course of this sort of transition, that changes the way you think about the world.
I think it's the case. We did a survey, and in that survey, the number one item mentioned by individuals in the survey in terms of jobs they're looking for, stability. Interestingly, and I think that result is a function of where we are in the economic cycle.
And that used Peggy. How can you possibly say to a Microsoft employee, you have stability?
Well, in fact, because everything, as I started, is changing around us, business model, competition, all that, there isn't a lot of stability in business. And technology, by the way, is accelerating. The change of pace of technology is accelerating. So in a world that doesn't have a lot of stability, we try to give our employees the best tools possible. We have a lot of training online. We have sort of the Microsoft University that handles a lot of reskilling of people. Microsoft, because we're such a large group of several different businesses really inside one umbrella, they've had a long history of movement around the company. So we do have the ability to move people around quite a bit. But it's incumbent upon us to help them with the skills they need to go into these other jobs. And we are mindful of that. We want to ensure that they don't just end because statisticians are wiped out because an algorithm has replaced them, but that they have another step to go into. Our employees are our most valued assets.
Yeah, you're spot on with that, Peggy. I think getting people to think about, they create that stability not because they're going to have the same job for their entire career, but rather because the employer is going to provide them the opportunity to do multiple roles and multiple jobs within that company. And that's sort of the new world. And so you create a sense of stability in that things are always changing. And in fact, we're going to give you the tools so that you can stay ahead. And the most informed employees, they're going to get it. They do get it.
But is there a sense? But are there also one group of people who you just can't bring on? They're not. They are. I'm no doubt there's some ageism in this, but there are a group of people for whom this is too big a jump. And what happens to them?
You know, it's interesting. I think people self-select. They think, maybe going back to the statistician, I'm a statistician, that's what I do, there's no statistician's jobs, I'm out of a job. But it's really about their cognitive abilities. What are their skills that they have that then we can revector into other jobs? So it's a little bit incumbent upon the employee themselves to have, going back to Satya's idea, this idea of a growth mindset. It's not just about defining yourself as one thing. I know for me, I started my career as an engineer, and for a long time I defined myself as an engineer. And when a business job opened up, I thought, well, I can't do that because I'm an engineer. I'm not. What do I know about business? And if you can allow yourself to understand what you're good at, the things that you can do, and that can actually be expansive in your next step in your career. And if you can break through to that, you can have a growth mindset, you're better off.
Mike Bloomberg began as an engineer, so I'm regularly reminded of
there you go.
the great skills.
The business acumen of engineers.
A kind of big societal point, though, governments. I mean, what's happening is many people could look at this and say, well, look, it's fine. What you're doing is great, and it makes sense for Microsoft and the Peru to try to retrain people to equip them for this new world. But there is also a responsibility broader than that. That's the reason why we elect politicians. Do you think government has to change the way it thinks about education? Is there going to be a new kind of social contract where, say, government will educate you up to the age of 18, but it'll also come back and re-educate you when you're 40 or whatever the age is, 50, or that government has to change the way it thinks about this? And has government been helpful to either of you in what you've been through in these changes?
I think the biggest help is to have more corporations and government exchange of knowledge, because technology is moving so quickly that government sometimes hasn't kept up with the pace of change of technology. And so they can be behind, and the technology has already zoomed ahead. And so we're starting now to see, well, first of all, we are very engaged with Washington. We want to make sure Washington understands, for instance, where something like artificial intelligence is going. But you really want to make sure there's open dialogues between the two, so that we're understanding where government wants to go.
Just on that, imagine you were put in charge of AI in the government. What would you do? I
would definitely hire some more folks who understand the technology and bring them into the government, which we do have the Office of Technology does a bit of that. But we need a deeper understanding amongst our politicians as well about the power of some of these technologies that are being exposed.
Yeah, and I guess, if you think about the government is wedded to, again, a legacy way, just as many employees and corporations have sort of legacy habits they've brought into the future, the government's done the same thing. So the way in which we go about funding education for those that need, assistance is actually very rigid and doesn't work with the new world, right? It's, it's all about four-year, very classic four-year college educations. And the reality is people need training now post-college because of changes in technology. People may need technical training, not college training, in terms of the career choices that they're making. And so more flexibility is probably needed, and that creates a new lens that understands technology and the way in which individuals have to build their careers around where technology is. But it's not a government answer at the end of the day. We have this concept that I like a lot. I didn't coin the phrase, but I love it, and it's called stackable institutions. And it's really about how companies, first of all, individuals, because the responsibility is with the individual, in the beginning and in the end, but it's how governments, academics, and companies come together to build platforms that can work on each other. I got this really great note just last week, and I actually told her, I said, you know what, if I get a chance, I'm going to bring this up on the panel, so I'm going to do it. It was a program that was being set up in our actuarial area where they're recruiting kids out of high school in Newark, where we're headquartered, that are in math studies. And what we're doing is we're bringing them in early and mentoring them, and we're giving them exposure to programs, and we're running them through case challenges and things like that, with the idea that, incidentally, these are kids both in the public school system and in the charter school system, which we have in Newark. So there's government stepping in and broadening how they're thinking about education. We're bringing those kids then and positioning them for an honors college that's been set up at Rutgers in Newark. Now so now you're working, private, working with academic to set, to create a pipeline of kids in Newark that can make it into that honors school. We have then endowed, as part of a $180 million commitment we've made to Opportunity Youth, we took $10 million of that and we endowed a scholarship for Newark kids. They can get full free rides to the school. Okay, so now it's corporation now marrying again, and we're not the only ones who are participating in that program. So corporations participating with Rutgers in order to create opportunities for individuals. Then we create internship programs, and we're looking for full-time hires out of this. So it's back and forth between government, universities, and corporations in order to create institutions and programs that stack on each other to deliver the end result. No one's got a panacea, no one's got the start to finish. It has to be cooperation across all sectors.
Do you think the American job market is still too rigid, and I suppose, or indeed looking globally? And if this conversation was taking place in France, for instance, I think the biggest problem you would both be facing would be the difficulty of moving anybody really around different bits. Or do you think in America that is still an easy thing to do? If you're looking for a more flexible workforce, is the law not a problem?
I don't know if I've thought of it as a problem.
Well, we operate in Japan. We operate with 20 different countries.
Well, that's your
and what I can say is,
when
I look at the 20 different countries we're in, the United States is the least of my worries in terms of workplace flexibility.
But that was slightly my point, is that anywhere, if we had this debate anywhere else, that would be the first thing people would bring up, is rather than the government not helping enough with education, it would be, why the hell are they getting in the way? But here you both think the government is not necessarily getting in the way.
You know, I think we could do an even better job of it. For instance, one of the things, we'd like to see is more computer science in high schools. We'd like to see, a real backing there. One of the problems was we didn't have enough teachers who were trained to teach the classes. So Microsoft put together a program where we have a bunch of people who know a few things about computer science, and we took those folks, some of our employees, through a program called TEALS, and we bring them into the classroom and sort of train the teachers on how to teach computer science. So, because one of the first problems we found is there's just not enough teachers. There's kids who want to learn it, and there's some great online courses, but we don't have really the skill set amongst the teaching base. And so, working with the government, we were able to kick off a program like this and touch classrooms now across the nation, starting with Microsoft employees coming in, and then the ball gets rolling, and we've got the skills now in the classrooms equipped to teach kids computer science.
In about 2 minutes, we're going to jump to the questions from the floor, but I just wanted to ask both of you, saying this is an ideas festival, is from the point of view of people here with other companies, in this zone, particularly of reskilling workforces, what is the sort of big idea you think people should think about from a corporate point of view?
I go back to understanding skills. I think it's very important that we not fall into the definition of a job, the requirements for a job. You want to really understand the skills underneath and not get tripped up on a title, because that is exclusionary. It'll keep people out because they think, I can't do that because I'm not, I'm not an engineer, but they may have some skills that could very well be deployed into a job. And so if we don't get tripped up on titles, I think we'll be able to keep people adequately employed.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that at all. And I guess what I'd add to that is that it then becomes a continuous cycle. That's another big takeaway of this. This isn't a once and done. It's not like, okay, we're now into the workforce of the future. We made it, we're done.
Yeah.
Right? The reality is the cycle of learning has compressed from decades into years, into a handful of years. And so as a company, when we set up the programs, they have to be programs not just about getting over this from where we are today to the next 3 to 4 years, but then thinking decades out in increments of 3 and 4 years, so a continuous process of education, apprenticeship, and just rolling people through.
And one last point on that. I think companies have a lot of what's called first-line workers, and these are the sort of the people behind the counter who work at the clinics, who are on the factory floor. Oftentimes, these are the workers that are closest to the product or closest to the customer. And as employers, you might think, well, they're trained in a certain way. I'm not quite sure where to go from here. You can actually use technology to help even first-line workers do their jobs better. One of the things that we're doing, we're working with the company PACCAR, who builds the big automotive or heavy industrial vehicles and engines and things like that. And so they're first-line workers working on a factory floor for the first time. We've been working with them with our HoloLens, which is augmented reality devices that you put on and you still see the world around you, but it can be augmented with data about whatever you're seeing. So these first-line workers who may not have had a computer science background or have any sort of coding background can actually, through the HoloLens, come up to speed more quickly, so the technology can help them do their jobs better. They don't have to go back and refer to manuals and things. They put the glasses on. Basically, the manual is built in, and it can help them do their job, and they can onboard more quickly. So we should think of technology as helping all of our employees, not just reskilling the highly skilled ones, but even our first-line workers.
For some reason, I'm thinking whether you could do that to journalists or not.
Possibly.
Why don't we go to questions? The gentleman there.
Thank you so much for all you do. I would like to ask Ms. Johnson a question, Peggy. You were talking about understanding skills. I happen to have read your CEO's book about hit refresh,
Yeah.
and I learned that he happens to have a son with significant disabilities. And then people have been talking about corporate purpose, and then words like apprenticeships keep being tossing about. I was wondering if Microsoft is devoting any resources to looking at apprenticeship programs for people with autism and other kinds of disabilities that could, in fact, be the next world coders, if you will.
We absolutely are. Thanks for that question. We are looking at a workforce that is inclusive of our population. And we have found that the autistic population has a certain set of skill sets that actually, going back to skilling, what are different people good at, has a set of skill sets that is actually very applicable for some of the problems we're trying to solve. So we do have a workforce program on our campus for varying levels of autism, by the way, from one end of the spectrum to the other. And it's been very successful. It's been most successful when we've married the autistic candidates with a manager who has, like Satya, has some background with disability in their family. And so they have an understanding of how to work with autistic individuals. And it's been very successful. We've talked to other companies about doing the same sort of thing. And if you, again, go back to the skilling, understanding really what are individual people good at, you can actually marry them up with problems you're trying to solve, which corporations are trying to solve. So we're early days, but so far we've been very happy with the results and are starting to work with other companies to do the same thing.
Very interesting. Lady there.
The workplace today typically has about 5 different generations within the workplace. So do you have any examples of how you are unlocking this generational intelligence within the workplace? Because with different generations, you have different expectations around flexibility, working styles, working patterns. So really unlocking the generational intelligence in the workplace is something that I think a lot of organizations are struggling with, and just wondered if you had any advice.
Rob, do you want to take this?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and we do face that because we've got everything from the baby boomers that are retiring to the my young children, the millennials, and then whatever the generations are after that. And what we find is that there's a certain tension in the workplace that's associated with that. We held this culture jam about a year or so ago, and there was one thread on it that got started by someone saying, and it was done tongue in cheek, but it was kind of interesting. The thread that got started, which is, when are all these baby boomers going to retire to make way for us, in our positions? And you sort of think about that tension, and you're like, wow. Now, it was actually meant in a good-natured sort of way, but it does point to the fact that you have.
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, maybe not.
Someone might be trying to get rid of you.
Particularly at my end of the spectrum. But what we find is we're highly focused on ensuring that we actually celebrate that diversity. So while it can create some tension, the reality is our view of it is it creates a much healthier dynamic for us, because we think about our marketplace is that full spectrum. And if we don't have that full spectrum represented within our workplace, we're not going to be successful in the market. So just like you need, comic book writers and others that can take those data scientists and relate it to your customers, we actually need people who understand the full spectrum of our customers, so that we're ensuring that both the types of things that we're creating, the types of services and products we're providing, and the way in which we're trying to get those sort of from our organization to the customer is tailored to that individual experience. And so for us, the saying is, we're not trying to have customers, we're not trying to, quote, sell to customers on our terms. We're actually trying to meet with customers on their terms, right? They want to meet it on how and when they want to interact with us. And for every generation, and for lots of other spectrums of diversity that you could think about, it is actually quite different. And we have to have a system for being able to address everyone on their own individual terms, and to be able to do so economically. That's one of the benefits of technology, is it allows us, a digital interface with individuals that can become very tailored to their unique circumstances. So while there undoubtedly are the challenges associated with those multi-generations, and whether they're trying to push the older generation out or not, in reality, the benefits we get from it far outweigh any of the tension that's created from, from having different agendas.
Yeah, I would just add to that we build products and services at Microsoft, and if our teams that build those don't reflect the population that we're trying to serve, there's like a business impact for not having diverse teams. So you want to have young and old together, you want to have different ethnic groups, you want to have different socioeconomic groups, because they will bring a perspective that reflects the population. And if you have all of one type, if you had all of Peggy Johnsons on a team, that would make a great product for Peggy Johnson and nobody else. So we have to make sure that as we're building our design teams, they look like our population, and age included, because otherwise it's just a big miss, and there's a business impact to missing your addressable market.
Lady here, and then we'll do the one back there.
Hi there. If in your perfect world, if this was a room of educators, what would be some skills that you would want educators to be teaching the pipeline, the next generation of kids coming up? What would your dialogue be with educators?
Well, could I jump in?
Yes, jump in, please.
I've got a story on this, but go ahead. Yeah, please.
I would like to see computer science taught as the same way that we have a language requirement. I would like a computer science requirement. We still don't have that actually across all the states. And I think whatever industry we go into, in fact, World Economic Forum says there's something like amongst our elementary school kids, 65% of the jobs that they will hold don't even have a title yet, right? So they're going to go into jobs that you and I can't even imagine just yet. But having a core skill like computer science alongside all of the other core skills, I think is an important thing. And I wish we could get that, across from one end of the nation to the other. I think that one's very important.
Rob, do you have anything?
Well, yeah, I absolutely agree that you need, so that we teach a full spectrum of skills that include both the qualitative and quantitative aspects of that. I'm very careful, though, not to oversteer on the quantitative piece, because the reality is, we're teaching everyone Python in our accelerator today, right? At some point in time, Python will be relevant, and there'll be something else that's replacing that. And so the continuous learning piece of it, individuals who have learned to learn, that's critical. When my son was at school, the story I was going to tell is, he's brilliant in math. He had scholarship opportunities to go full rides for math, and he decides to study history at a different university because Dad will pay for that. Terrific. But the point is, I actually embraced that, because I thought in the longer term, his studying history was giving him skills that, once he got that first job with a history major and overcame that, he is going to have ability to adapt throughout his entire career, because the thinking associated with the skills he was developing as a study as a student of history were very different than just the pure quantitative stuff he was going to learn in a math class. And that, to him, I think, is going to propel his long-term career potential. So I'm glad he's great at math. He's going to need that long-term, but I'm also really glad he went on to study something that's going to give him, continuous learning capabilities.
Okay, there's a lady back there who had a blonde hair, and then we'll come somebody over here. If there's a man right at the back.
Hi. I really like the idea of stackable, and I'm curious what you both have to say about the role, whether what you're trying to do is mostly internal in terms of training, or to the extent that external organizations are getting involved, what you need from them in order for them to be good partners to you.
We actually have grants out to just learned the number recently. It's like well over 100 different organizations, and many of which are involved in sort of touch this opportunity youth and future of work that we look to sponsor. And for us, they range from making investments in order to, because there's a segment of society that we're looking to help and sort of help them facilitating them, helping that segment of the population, to those that we think actually can integrate back into our own organization. So what we did with Rutgers University and the scholarship program we have there, by way of example, is something that we think ties very nicely into creating future workers for our organization. There's this Perscolas organization that's up, and it's being rolled out in a number of cities, and we sponsored its rollout in Newark, and it's taking mid-career individuals and retraining them into technical positions. And those are individuals we've actually already begun to hire from that program into our organization. So ideally, we'd like to be sponsoring things where we see a twofold benefit, that we're doing good because we're part of our corporate social responsibility, but we're doing it in a way that actually there's a commercial benefit to us, and that we can take those programs and figure out how we can do that to the advantage of our own employees as we're looking to reskill and create opportunities for them.
I mean, one of the things I would just say to the groups who are in this area is put it on our radar. Because a lot of times we don't see everything across the board, and so if there's something that's working, something interesting that you see, we'd love to see that at Microsoft as well, because we have the ability then to scale up something like that. And so let us know, send me an email. I'd love to hear about it.
Guy in the back. There.
Thank you. You mentioned, Rob, I think one side comment when you were talking about your apprenticeship program about how the hardest client you have is your managers. And I'm interested in listening to all this, which I think makes a lot of sense. But when you think about reskilling your workforce, or spending $180 million in Opportunity Youth, or making your population within your company look more like America, it's easy to say that up here. It's a lot harder to get your hiring managers and your managers to really engage in that way and want to hire those people and have the skills to train those people. What are you both doing to drive change in management training or practices or policies or whatever it might be in your organizations?
So we're doing all of that, but the real trick, because this is a steep wall to climb, right, or hill to climb. The real trick is you have to construct a bargain, because you're not going to overcome all that in the short term, and this is urgent. We need to get people doing this right away. And so what we've done is the way the apprenticeship program works, it's sort of like a borrow, right? It's sort of like it's a test and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, you can give the person back to us. And so it overcomes some of the obstacles of the hiring manager, because what they're afraid of is, okay, I'm going to get this individual, and not only are their skills not going to actually be able to do the job, now you stuck me with figuring out, what do I do with this person? How do I then place them out of the organization or get them somewhere else, because they're not doing the job and they're clogging it up, and there's a burden on my team that's associated with that. So what we've told them is, 6 months, try it. Give this person an opportunity to succeed. And if they succeed, terrific. Everyone's happy. The manager, the employee, we're all in a good situation. If they don't succeed, we'll take them back into the program, so that you're not stuck with sort of a long-term, quote, problem. And I think presenting it that way is frankly, it's just a very tactical way to overcome the resistance that's going to otherwise be there. We're not being naive about that resistance. You have to do something like that in order to get the manager to accept people from the program, because otherwise all the things that you mentioned are going to be obstacles to them ultimately being willing to bring these people in and see them succeed.
Yeah.
Peggy?
I would say what we've tried to do at Microsoft is give our managers the time to meet some of these goals. Like, we have diversity and inclusion goals, and they'll say, oh, but I just want this certain person, and so I'm going to look for that person, and they end up having slates that aren't terribly diverse. And we're saying, hey, take the time. You might have to cast a wider net to find the right people, but you have the time to do that. Sometimes our hiring managers feel like, I need the person in place within a week, and I know exactly the type of person I'm going to get, and they end up not being terribly diverse. So we're giving them the sort of an amount of time to go off and find the right candidates, so that we end up building teams that are more diverse.
We do the same, although I will say, Peggy, one of the challenges even in that is that the hiring manager often is someone they're on the front line. And
under pressure.
And under pressure.
Yeah.
And when that vacancy is open, as long as it's open, the pressure comes not just from the organization to hire, the pressure comes from the trying to deliver the results. Right. And so we find that even with that culture that we try to establish, which is go the extra yard, find the individual, and everything you said resonates with me, that manager is saying, but my team is working overtime, I'm doing the job that I need someone else to do. And so they're putting the pressure on themselves to actually try to get that slot filled, which is part of, I think, the challenge that we have to come have to overcome.
with our
Just one
managers.
last bit on that, just to ask a question for me. Diversity, strikes me, we haven't covered it that much. Do you
We talked about generations, that's diversity.
I know generation, that was interesting, but do you think that in this great upheaval that we're going through, that we will end up with a more diverse workforce, or do you think that and how fast is it? It's obviously not going fast enough, but can you see progress, both of you?
Absolutely. I mean, we see progress because, you know, it's not only the right thing to do, but there's business impact to it. If we don't have diverse teams, we're not building products for the population. And so when you can tie the business impact into it, a lot of times it helps accelerate any goals that we've put in place for diversity.
Yeah, one of the to a certain extent, technology is the great equalizer. I remember someone described to me in our tax area. They became actually the head of our tax, and when they went into tax, they went in 2 tax regimes ago in terms of when the tax bill had been completely rewritten. And they said it was a great time to come into tax because everyone who had bodies of knowledge about how the tax code worked, they were worthless because the tax code had changed entirely. So it made no difference whatsoever. So he came in as a new person, but was on an equal playing field with everyone else. So if you think about technology changing the playing field, everyone comes into that. Now, the background's considered, but everyone comes in with an opportunity to start at the same place. And that's a great equalizer from that standpoint. When you talk about wealth inequality, every time that we've had this buildup of inequality of wealth within nations, the equalizer of that has always been an industrial revolution of some sort or another. It's leveled the playing field. So, you know, you were wealthy because you owned land. Suddenly land wasn't valuable, manufacturing was valuable. You were wealthy because you owned manufacturing. Suddenly, if you didn't have automation, that wasn't valuable. And so using technology as a great equalizer is, I think, longer term, a good thing for society, and it's a good thing for diversity.
So we're going to end with the big message is that government should go forth and mess up the tax code.
Yes,
allow us all to go forward.
That's the takeaway.
Rob,
That's the one thing we really want you to take away from this conversation, yes.
Rob and Peggy, thank you both very much. And thank you, particularly the audience. I thought the questions were considerably better than mine. Thank you very much. Thank you.